everyone, welcome to Real Talk with Professor Swag, and this time we're going to talk about the second college football playoff rankings for year 2021. So, as you guys already know, Georgia is number 1, Alabama ranked number 2, Oregon number 3, and Ohio State number 4. And then you have just the couple of teams on the outside, like Cincinnati and so forth. But the thing that I really want to talk about is what is going on with the committee. Like, they still seem to have SEC bias within this decision-making process. I just don't get it. I don't get it. Okay, Oklahoma stayed idle at number 8, and they're undefeated. UTSA got ranked at, I believe, at 21 for the first time being ranked since they threw. I believe it's more of people getting upset that they weren't ranked and they were an undefeated team. That probably had more to do with it than anything, honestly. I believe it was more fan pressure than anything. As crazy as it sounds, that's just my personal opinion. But this is what gets me, all right? So, Alabama had a horrible victory against LSU. LSU was pretty much playing with 3rd and 4th string personnel, 2nd string personnel, without many starters. Let's just put it that way. They were playing without many of their starters. And Alabama struggled against LSU. They struggled. They only beat them by a touchdown. But you penalized Oklahoma for beating Kansas, because you say, oh, that's Kansas. You're not supposed to lose to Kansas. You're not supposed to be that close to Kansas. You penalized Oklahoma for having a close game to Kansas, but you didn't penalize Alabama for having a close game to LSU. That's one of the biases that really kind of hurts me in this situation. You got to be impartial across the board. People say, oh, it's the SEC. The SEC is just a name. It doesn't have anything to do with what the individual teams are doing on the field. Yes, they have a historical, but they have history of being great and very competitive. But because the conference as a whole has a history of being very competitive and playing good games, doesn't mean, oh, because their history is this, that, oh, that's LSU, that Bama should have got, a pass on that one. They should not have gotten a pass. The next thing that I don't quite get is the Oregon, Ohio State, Michigan State scenarios. I really don't get those. Because first thing first, right? We already know Oregon lost to Ohio State, which I mentioned in my previous video. And I understand why Oregon was above Ohio State, because they had the head-to-head match in which Oregon beat them. But then you got to look at Michigan State and Michigan. Michigan State beat Michigan in the head-to-head match. But then you go and say, oh, but Purdue beat Michigan State. And I get it. Yes, Purdue did beat Michigan State the following week, and I understand why you would drop them. And you maybe the committee has said it's just like a tad bit, an inch or whatever. But at the end of the day, the head-to-head matchup should matter. It should definitely matter, because in other scenarios, that would normally be deemed as the tiebreaker. How did they do in head-to-head matchups? And now, when we talk about alike games, or games of, comparison, then you disrespecting Oklahoma, who's undefeated, because you said, oh, that Nebraska team played very well against Ohio State. Ohio State only beat them by a few points, but didn't Oklahoma beat Nebraska too? Why weren't they awarded for their win? But then you say, oh, they don't play anybody. Well, they played Texas, and Texas was ranked in the top 25 at the time. So they can't go back and make Texas start playing better now all of a sudden. They can only go by how the team was doing at the time. So you're penalizing Oklahoma with under normal circumstances, would have been a quality win over Texas, considering they had to come back from 21 down in the game to, they had to do a 28-14 comeback or whatever to win the game. And then you penalize them for the Kansas game when they literally came back from a 10-point deficit and scored a 28-7 point difference in the game and won the game. Every game that they've come back in, the committee has made the excuse to say they didn't look good, but not taking in consideration of the fact that it's harder to come back and win those games when you're further down. It is extremely hard. And one thing I can say about those teams, the Cincinnatis, the Oklahomas, the UTSAs that pulled off those victories in those last minute seconds, those are major things, because it is extremely hard to come back and take the lead than it is to have the lead and maintain it. It is way much harder to do that. Just like it is much harder to stay undefeated than it is to lose a game. And that's why I believe that wins should matter. The wins should absolutely matter. What's going on is the committee then got too focused and always have their viruses focus on the SEC and trying to figure out how to find a way to put the SEC in the midst, that it doesn't really even matter what the other teams do. It is absolute bias and ridiculous, because Auburn, Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas, they all have controversial games as far as comparisons. Like they lost to one or two teams here and there, or they lost to a Division II school, or whatever the case may be. It's just complete bananas, absolute bananas. I just don't get it. I do not get it. But I'll put it this way. This week, and I might be a little biased because I'm an Oklahoma Sooner fan, but I'm just trying to be fair and impartial across the whole board. This week, if Oklahoma beats Baylor, if they beat Baylor, now that would be 2 victories against top 25 opponents. 2, because Texas was ranked at the time Oklahoma played them. Then Oklahoma will have beaten Baylor in the head-to-head at Baylor. And keep in mind, when Oklahoma play Texas, it's always on the neutral field. And it's really more or less a home game for Texas. I believe it was actually a home game for Texas this year. I'm not for sure. I could be wrong. Either way it go, the game is played in Texas. So it's still kind of like a home game for Texas, whether Oklahoma is looked at as the home team or whether Texas is looked at as a home team. Whatever the case may be, it's technically, it's more or less, a away game for Oklahoma either way. So basically, Oklahoma went on the road and won both those games. If that happens this week, if Oklahoma beats Baylor, Oklahoma, without a doubt, should be ranked number 2 or number 3. It shouldn't even be an argument for it. It shouldn't be. You'll be an undefeated team at 10-0. You will have 2 top 25 wins on your resume, and you will have beaten both teams on the road and or on a neutral field. That's the type of stuff I'm talking about. There's no way that the committee can overlook that. And if they do, then we know it's absolute bias. Mark my word, everybody that's watching this video, when you watch the college football games this weekend and you watch Oklahoma play Baylor, if Oklahoma goes and beats Baylor in Waco at McWayne Stadium, Oklahoma should jump from 8 to the 2nd or 3rd position in the CFB polls, without a doubt. Without a doubt, it would be no excuse to take a 10-0 team who won 2 top 25 games on the road, because the Red River Shootout is at a neutral site. So on the road this year, I mean, there's no excuse. Absolute no excuse. Now, one more thing I do want to say, shouts out to Purdue. Purdue going out there doing big things. They jumped into the rankings. And it's a good thing that the fans were pretty ticked off that UTSA weren't in the rankings while they're undefeated. It's definite. That was a definite to show, you know, some respect for that team who's going out there and winning hard games. But one thing the committee, if you're a committee member and you somehow run across this video, you need to be valuing wins first, because wins are supposed to matter, and there is not supposed to be a such thing as a good loss. How can you sit there and say you had a good loss, but this team had a bad win, but they won the game? They won the game. They completed the objective of the game, and that's to win. But anyway, that's my 2 cents. You can follow me here on YouTube at Professor_swag, or you can follow me at Instagram at Professor_swag as well. But when you do follow me here on YouTube, make sure you put a space between the R and the underscore. It's as if it's 2 names with the underscore in front of the word swag. And you can also follow me on the podcast, anchor.fm/professor-swag. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.